to make sense of what INEC has done today and the impact it might have on Anambra governorship election, which will happen in November 6th this year, and of course, the announced dates for the Ekiti and Osun governorship elections, I'm being joined by the director of Plaque, Policy and Legal Advocacy Center, and also a constitutional lawyer, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, who joins us virtually from Abuja. It's good to see you, Mr. Nwankwo. Give us a sense, if you may, on what this means. When INEC says there were polling units at shrines, there were polling units in churches and mosques. How did we get to that point?
Thank you, Sean. I must commend INEC for this significant achievement. As we know, the last polling units that exist before these changes were created in 1996, which was several years ago, more than 20-something years now, 24, 25 years. And I think that when you look at the fact that the electoral system has evolved and changed so much, you would see why in 1996, individuals could own polling units. And so people would take and capture polling units and decide where to locate it. So traditional rulers would decide at a particular polling unit that they go to vote in are their polling units. So they would site it in palaces. Of course, even in religious houses, you will see this cited. And I think quite humorously, the idea that polling units are located as well in shrines, which may actually be correct, given the divergence of different interests around the electoral system. So I think it's really very important what INEC has done, being able to identify polling units, first of all, to ensure that polling units are accessible to all persons and people are not restricted because of religion, because of other considerations or politics. So I think it's a major step forward in terms of electoral process. Also looking at the polling units, you get the sense that accessibility is key and being able to create access is important. Proximity is also key. And there are several other things that this particular creation of polling units has solved. As you can note from the INEC chairman's presentation, more than 56,000 polling units have been created by this particular intervention of the commission. And I think for a lot of us who have been observing elections in this country in the last several years, what we have seen is that you do have polling units divided into what is called polling points. And those polling points then become a breeding ground for violence. Some polling units sometimes extend into several numbers of polling points. And so you would see that you would have a huge convergence of voters in particular areas. And that means that the population of people turning up to vote becomes really huge and unmanageable for even observers who are observing the elections, but especially the Electoral Commission, the security forces and services. So all of this creates huge problems, and I'm quite happy that the manageability of polling units would perhaps be made easier by these dispersal of polling units that have been converged in particular locations. And the Commission from observation also has made, in its regulations, have clearly indicated the maximum numbers you can have in a polling unit. And we have seen this exceed tremendously in recent elections. So I think it's really welcome to see that INEC has taken this step in reducing the tensions that hugely populated polling units create.
I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I know the Electoral Act provides that a polling unit should not be more than 800 and 1,000. When it exceeds, it's supposed to be broken down. Am I right, Mr. Nwankwo? It then gives us a sense of how people in Anambra State who voted in the last presidential election, a general election, and in the last governorship election, how will they be able to easily adjust to the new creation of these polling units. And perhaps what should INEC be looking, because the issue of information to voters so that there won't be displacement and disenfranchisement ahead of the Anambra governorship election.
Well, I think that's the challenge that this new system has created or will create. But I'm happy that there is the opportunity beginning from, I think, June 26th of the continuous voters registration that INEC is introducing for people. And I think a lot of information needs to go out there that even where you have been registered, it is important that you are able to identify where your new polling units would be and be able to work with this new opening that has been created with CVR, Continuous Voters Registration, to ensure that you look towards registering or moving your registration to a particular unit where you would be. And I think that people also need to take into account the factor that during election day, it is always that people are operating from their homes, and registering in a working area may be a challenge. So I think there's a huge opportunity with CVR, but I think INEC needs to do a lot, and I guess all of us, even in civil society, needs to do a lot to create awareness about the implications of this. There is also the whole issue of population expansion and demography that this poses. A lot of people have moved locations, a lot of people have relocated, new areas have emerged that were never taken into account in 1996 when these existing polling units were first created. So I think there's a huge opportunity with the CVR that we all work to ensure that there is huge awareness about the CVR, what it's intended to achieve. And I think looking at the Anambra elections, which is actually really imminent, November 6th, it means that a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that new registrants, new voters are captured, but even then that existing voters are able to identify ahead of the elections in November where they would be voting and where they need to update this, that they use the opportunity of the CVR to do so. But I think overall, we must commend INEC for the way it has managed this process. As you will recollect, in the 2015 elections, or ahead of the 2015 elections, this issue came up and it became really controversial. But this commission has done so very well managing this particular process at this time, with extensive consultations with all stakeholders and creating enlightenment so that the fears around it have been minimized significantly. Of course, we'll have to see how this plays out on the field, but overall, I think it's commendable what the commission has done.
All right. There has been the issue of underage voting or underage voters, padding of electoral register in favor of some parts of the country where you have unbelievable numbers. And when the issue of creation of polling units, this suspicion and this perhaps doubts in the minds of those who believe strongly that some of these underage voting or incredible polling units exist, would you say that the creation has been fair? If you look at the map, have you been able to study the distribution of these new voting numbers?
Well, what we have seen is not that INEC has registered new voters. What INEC has done basically is to use the existing information that they have to identify additional polling units. Yes, there are concerns about padding of the voters register, and everyone is expecting that the commission will continue to do what it needs to do to ensure that you build a credible election. Personally, my thinking is that you perhaps need to go back to the drawing board with the Nigerian voters register. But I guess INEC has its reasons for continuing to update in what it calls continuous voter registration, that register. I personally think that the register needs to be restarted, so to say, especially with new innovations that we have seen in electronics, new innovations we have seen with technology. That way we can weed out what has been a surplusage on the voters register. And I think beyond that as well, on voting day, I think the electoral system needs to be strengthened such that you can easily identify infringements on the voters register, whether it's double registration, underage voting, and all of that. I think that becomes a process of managing the elections that we all need to ensure continues to be in place. And we're hoping, and I think every Nigerian is getting exceedingly on the edge right now about the Electoral Act, electoral bill. It's a major concern for everyone now, the delay that is on with it. But our hope is that when the National Assembly reconvenes on Tuesday next week, it will put aside every other business and ensure that we do have an Electoral Act in place immediately.
On a final note, and perhaps maybe in 30 seconds, this new idea of announcing election dates long before the election, how does it come to you? Now we know Ekiti and Osun elections, the dates these elections will happen. In 30 seconds, can you give us an idea of what these will add, the value it will add to our elections?
It would create certainty, but more importantly, the politicians tend to manipulate the electoral process by not being prepared. And when they are not prepared, they create circumstances that compel the Electoral Commission to postpone elections. And we've seen that with several elections in Nigeria in recent times. So our hope is that the politicians, the political parties, see these dates well ahead, prepare for it, and get set for elections on the dates that have been announced.
Mr. Clement Nwankwo is perhaps one of Nigeria's most experienced election experts, a constitutional lawyer, and the executive director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. Thank you so much for the insights you have given to us on this election matter. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Sheon.
And that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sheon Kimale. Bye for now.